Hi, so this is my lesson that I'm teaching. This is my wife, Chelsea. She is going to be taught today. And today we're going to be talking about editorial analysis. So, how to analyze an editorial from a newspaper or a media source. The objectives for this class period will be students will be able to define an editorial and compare the differences to other media types, as opposed to like news articles or news broadcasts, as opposed to blogs, things of that type. Students will be able to identify which editorial sources have which bias. Everything has bias, so we're going to be able to identify which sources have which biases. And students will be able to evaluate and analyze editorials for strengths and weaknesses. So to start off, this is an example of more of a visual editorial. Most editorials come in written format, but this is an example of an editorial. It comes from the fictional news source called The Onion, so none of this is actually news, but it does a good example of introducing us to the genre. So we're going to watch this. Oop, go back.
This week, the New York Times will run the first in a six-part series examining America's overuse of Hannah Montana star Miley Cyrus. Most experts now agree that at current usage levels, Miley Cyrus will be drained dry of entertainment value by 2013. Joining us now is Miley researcher Dr. Justin Canty from the Institute for Sustainable Cyrus Use. Doctor, you say this is the worst entertainment crisis humanity has ever faced?
Absolutely. Miley is a potent entertainment resource, but we are overusing her at unprecedented levels. She's on television, albums, toys, clothing.
Okay.
She has a sold-out live concert series. If we don't act now, the down-to-earth Miley, who likes text messaging with her friends and playing guitar in her bedroom, will be wiped off the earth forever.
You point to the examples of Lindsay Lohan, Britney Spears, the Olsen twins.
Well, they were bountiful entertainment resources that our overconsumption reduced to smoldering remnants, but we are burning through Miley at a far more aggressive rate.
Then what is the timeline here?
Typically, a teenage star can have profits drilled from her for approximately 6 years before dropping down to is she too wild levels. Miley was discovered only 3 years ago, and already there's pregnancy rumors, the photo scandal.
However, though, Disney says it has plans to pump songs and shows out of Miley for at least another 3 to 5 years before discarding what's left of her.
She won't last that long. Within 2 years, she'll be little more than a withered, desiccated husk, incapable of causing anyone any amusement at all.
So what are the consequences if we don't cut back on our Miley use?
As Miley entertainment becomes more and more scarce, the millions of families across the world that have grown dependent on it will begin to fight for it or hoard it. Society as we know it will fail to function, governments will collapse, humanity will be reduced to roving tribes of barbarians constantly searching and fighting and scouring the landscape for the last remaining Hannah Montana fashion doll or the Best of Both Worlds CD. Incidentally, that is the future that's depicted on the cover of my new book.
A bleak prospect. Dr. Justin Canty of the Institute for Sustainable Cyrus Use. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Coming up, an earthquake.
Okay, we're going to stop there. So, obviously, this is a visual editorial, but the editorials that we're going to be talking about are news articles written on or in behalf of an editor that gives an opinion on a topical issue. And so, as we saw in the clip, the news anchor brought in this specialist, right, from the Miley Consumption Institute. And he said, he asked him questions, and this person that they brought in to explain these things went ahead and he gave his opinions. Oh, we're going to run out of, we're consuming Miley Cyrus products too much, and we're running out of that, and it's going to cause all these problems. And so news sources and media sources, they'll have editorials in their written text as opposed to visual, but they have the same format of giving an opinion on a topic. Even though news is supposed to be just what happened, they often include opinion articles. So what we're going to do now is we're going to do a Venn diagram, and we're going to talk about editorials and traditional news sources such as broadcasts or news articles or blogs, and we're going to go ahead and every student has a Venn diagram, And they're going to fill these out in small groups of 2 or 3. So I'm going to hand this to you. We are going to skip that part because I don't have a huge class that needs to do this actually. But we would bring it back and we'd have a discussion on the differences and similarities so that they can understand the differences between the editorial format and other news formats. Now we're going to talk about media bias. So all media has bias, and this is for a specific reason. So media gains its revenues from its readers, the people who go to that news source and they choose to consume that resource, that media resource, which equals sales, which equals business. So everybody has bias. I'll ask a student, what is the definition of bias?
Well, bias would be how your feelings or thoughts affect your opinion or what you're reporting or anything like that.
So what are some of your biases? What's your religion?
Well, I'm LDS, so
And how does that affect your bias?
I guess I have like my bias is for an example, marriage between a man and a woman. That's my bias, whereas some other people believe it should be for everyone.
So your religion directly affects your opinions
Yeah.
and views on world events. So other biases that you might have is you're a woman, you're a millennial. So these different things affect how we view different events. And so this is a graph, if you see here, an ideological placement of each source's audience. So they polled people and they determined their political ideologies, how far liberal they were on this side and how far conservative they are on this side. And then once they figured out how conservative or liberal they were, they asked them about where they get their news. And so you see here that there's a wide distribution. On this side, people that are more liberal tend to get their information from these sources versus more conservative, they get their news from these sources. And probably the reason why is because those sources feed to those biases. You don't want to read things that come in contradiction with your own biases. You're not going to go out, you mentioned that you believe that marriage between a man and a woman is what the correct thing and that gay marriage shouldn't be allowed. So are you going to read articles from the New Yorker or from the Daily Show or the New York Times that encourage and talk about gay marriage in a positive light?
Not as much.
Not as much as you wanting to consume media that already contributes and agrees with your biases, right? Okay, so as you can see, when you're the first step, one of the steps in analyzing an editorial is realizing where is it coming from. If you're going to be looking at an article that comes from the Huffington Post, it's going to have a very different bias than if it's an article written by Glenn Beck, right, in his program. So being aware of those biases before you read the article is very important because you can understand where the opinions are coming from, what are influencing the opinions that are being expressed in the editorial. Okay, so this is a model called iRead. It allows us to analyze an editorial, to break it down, to see if it's reliable, if we should agree with those opinions, what kind of evidence they show. So each letter represents the first word of the step. I is for identify the source, the author and the source, for trustworthiness and bias, right? So you're going to look at the author and you're going to say, you're going to maybe do some research and say, is this person qualified to speak on this subject? For example, the guy that in the movie clip, he came from the Institute of Miley Cyrus Consumption. So he's an expert, supposedly, in the area, right? You're not going to want to read an article about, let's say, global warming by somebody that has no experience or no knowledge about that area. And you need to identify the source. So is this coming again from MSNBC? Is this coming from Fox News? So or is it coming from a conservative blog, a very liberal blog that's maybe less trustworthy? And what kind of biases are going to be associated with that? Before you even read the article, you want to go over these things. The next point is to read the article, examine the main arguments. So as you're reading, you just list the arguments. They're arguing this, they're arguing this, they're arguing this. And then you break it down into two different categories. You analyze what of those main arguments is opinion, right? What is he saying? What is he or she saying that is purely opinion versus what are facts and examples that they're using? So they will mix facts and examples and say, because of these facts and examples, my opinion is we need to pursue this policy or this idea. So I'm going to show you explicitly how to do these 5 steps with an article, and we're going to read how poverty affects children's brains. I'm going to show you how to use this method, and then you guys are going to do another article, and I'm going to have you fill out those steps on the worksheet. So pay attention, because you're going to have to do these steps on your own in your small groups for your video project. So the first step from this article that I read, identify author, source, trustworthiness, and bias. So this article comes from the Washington Post. If you remember, back here, looking at my list, actually I've got it right here. The Washington Post is on the more liberal side, right? It's not as far as other ones, and it's not towards the conservative side. So I know that I have a moderately liberal political spectrum that they're going to be talking about. And it was written by Kimberly G. Noble. And some quick research on Kimberly. Kimberly G. Noble is an associate professor of neuroscience and education at Teachers College, Columbia University. So she teaches at Columbia University in neuroscience. So she's a fairly trustworthy source if she's a faculty member of a university. So she's a fairly trustworthy source. The next step is read the article. If I was actually teaching this lesson, I would read with the students. We would take time, maybe different groups reading out loud different parts. We're going to skip that for the moment. Examine the main arguments. So Noble argues that higher incomes result in more brain development. So poverty makes your brain less developed as a child. Poverty depletes parents' cognitive resources to raise their children, and we should increase spending to improve child development and end the cycle of poverty. So these are the main arguments. We're going to look at her opinions now versus the facts that she presents. She says, as a society, we cannot stand by when millions of children are at risk for not reaching their full cognitive and academic potential. That's an opinion. Some people might say, well, we can stand by, because how are you going to help these children reach their full cognitive ability? You're going to have to tax a lot more. So this is an opinion. This is a moral statement that doesn't have a factual base necessarily behind it, even though it might be a good idea, right? I'm not saying this is a bad opinion. I'm just saying that there's no hard evidence that says that we have to do that. Extra money would improve brain development. So she's claiming this, and thankfully she acknowledges, the effects of cash on child's brain development remain untested. So she says, I think extra money would improve brain development, but we haven't actually, as researchers, we haven't fully tested this idea, but I think it will. So there's no evidence to support that opinion. Finally, but we shouldn't wait for the test results to see if it works, because it could very well work. So she says, we're not going to wait for these research results to come back, because this could very well work and we could help a lot of people. Whether you agree with that opinion or not is another question. And these are various other of the facts that she cites. She cites several different studies. If we had more time, this is a shorter video, so we would go over these. And we would have a class discussion. Was the author convincing? Where are the strong points and where are they weak? We would probably do a think, pair, share for that. And for the final part, there's our 15 minutes. The final part of the class will be a guided practice. They're going to get into their video project groups, and each person will fill out, I'm going to pass out these I read worksheets, and they're going to analyze an article. And it's from Fox News. It's How Democrats Create and Sustain Poverty. And obviously there's going to be some facts in there, and obviously there's going to be some opinion in there. So I'm going to hand that to you, along with the article that I would print out for each group to look through. We'd have another class discussion on that, and then I would assign them their homework, which will be analyze 2 editorials, one on each side of the political spectrum. So again, using that graph that tells us which side they're on. Regarding your chosen topic for your group video project. So every student's going to be talking, each group will talk about a specific social issue, and to prepare them for that, they're going to each evaluate 2 articles and fill out an I read worksheet for each of them. And that is the end of my lesson. Thanks.